It's Monday, March 1st, 2021, and this is the iPhoneography Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Greg McMillan, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and good friend, Dave Podner. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Greg. How's it going today?
It's going really well because we have ourselves a wonderful guest to talk to tonight. We have with us this evening Riley Arthur, who is, let me get my notes back out. Okay, so Riley Arthur is, first of all, Mark Sadowski from Tiny Shutter introduced us through email, and I couldn't wait to have Riley on the show. She's a photojournalist and art director who's been published in National Geographic, the New York Times, the Guardian, and others. She's been interviewed on such media outlets as the BBC News. She's led photography workshops in various countries around the world, and I am so happy to meet you. Hello, Riley.
Hi, Greg and David. How are you?
Can't be better. If I was any better, I'd have to call myself Riley Arthur. So we are here tonight to talk to you about a new book that you wrote.
Yes.
This is exciting. I'm very excited to read this book because it's I look at it as a book jam-packed with tutorial stuff or lessons, I'll call them, but because it's all pertinent to photography, but especially iPhone photography, but it's also teaching how all that relates or works in photojournalism.
Yeah,
So,
the title of the book is Phone Photography for Everybody, iPhone Photojournalism Techniques. So just what you said, it's really targeted to appeal to, anyone who is interested in learning any little bit about using the iPhone for photojournalism or just for improving their skill set.
yeah. Now this is part of a series, though. Is that correct? The iPhone photography or iPhone photography for everybody. That is a series of books, is it not?
Yeah. So the publisher is Amherst Media Publishing, and they have this whole great series of books. Some of them are on, say, landscape photography or different editing techniques or portraiture. And so this is the first one they've ever done on photojournalism.
Cool. Well, they probably couldn't get anyone better to write it. with your experience. I mean, it's bound to be really good.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, Mark Sadowski from Tiny Shutter introduced us. So you were on Tiny Shutter like about a week or so ago.
Yep.
And then prior to that, you were on Photo Focus. And so, folks, there will be links to those podcasts in the show notes, and click on them, go give them a listen. They're very good. And they you guys talked about not just the book, but a lot of other things, right?
Yeah, just a range of things. The topics kind of meander depending on what was sort of more pertinent to the questions that they asked. Some of the questions were about my career and my background, and then some were really specific questions like, what gear do I have? So if you're interested in those, feel free to listen to those podcasts. And I'm excited to hear what you have for me here.
Yeah, well, we're going to concentrate on the book because that's what I'm more excited about. Maybe it's because I've already heard what you use for gear and stuff like that. But but I really want to do my part in helping promote this book too. So, is this your first book?
It is. So I have self-published a couple of books, but small editions. And when I say small editions, an edition of 10, say, not an edition of 100 or something like that.
Yeah, like
and
from Blurb or something.
Right, and they weren't available digitally or anything like that. So this was my first book with a contract and with a publisher, and it was a pretty good experience, I have to say. I am definitely a photographer first, and not necessarily a writer, though I do have a degree in photojournalism and some background in writing and blogging and so on. So I was able to kind of blend those skills, but it was definitely a challenge as a photographer to write a 128 page book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, writing is tricky because you want to get your point across and you want to stay on point. And I mean, with me personally, I can blabber on for hours about stuff. I could just imagine what it would look like if I wrote it. But
Well, right. And in this case, I wanted to be able to teach a variety of skills. So I wanted to kind of start at the beginning of basic photo 101 techniques so that people could pick up this book at any level and not feel intimidated. And so the content really does get more advanced as the book goes on. Though I will say, as a professional photographer and someone with a photojournalism background, it was challenging because there's so much to cover there. Even though the book, as I said, is over 120 pages, there's still so much I wasn't able to cover even in that. But I think it is a really good foray into developing these skills and really honing your skills as an iPhone photographer or iPhoneographer, as you say.
Yeah. Now, I said I wasn't going to mention stuff that was mentioned in the other programs, but one thing that really stands out in my mind when it comes to photojournalism is the big letting go of photographers from the Chicago Times. I think it was 2013.
Chicago Sun-Times. Yeah, they let go their entire photography staff at the time,
and the reporters were told to use their phones to capture images of what they were reporting on. And, I thought I couldn't see that lasting. And to my knowledge, I think they did bring a lot of them back, did they not?
They did. However, at the time, they were the first of a handful of newspapers to do that. They were just the first one, and they got the biggest backlash for doing so, and then it became a trend. But at the time, it was iPhone 6s, and I think iPhone 4s even, and the quality of the phone photography then isn't what it is today. So it was sort of unfair to say, go ahead, now you're a photographer, now you're a photojournalist. One, because I didn't give them any kind of training or any other introduction in any way, and they obviously were sad to see their colleagues go. But, the quality wasn't quite there. So that's why they sort of reverted back to hiring back a few of their original staff. The interesting thing about that, though, is that now that trend is happening again. And when publications shed employees or there's mergers and acquisitions, the art departments are always the first ones to get cut. And so photojournalists are I hate to say dying breed, but certainly an endangered one. And this book is really hoping to bridge that gap so that people either who are photojournalists or even just journalists or in that field in some way are able to pick up those skills and be able to kind of compete, because now they're expected to have a plethora of skills. They're expected to be able to do it all, which, as you know, sort of jack of all trades, master of none is not always the best way to go. Though it's happening in other industries too. In the tech industry, they want full stack developers that can do both front end and back end. And so, without the specialization, you are kind of losing some of the legacy skills. But that being said, with the iPhone, as you well know, there are so many things you can do in that camera that it's not necessarily apples to apples to a DSLR, but it's not far from it either. Yeah.
And I think, what was it? Was it our last show, Dave? We talked about ethics?
Yes. Yeah. In terms of partially computational photography and what people can sometimes do to photos, and the fact that manipulation needs, especially now, it's different between, let's say, I'm taking a photo of just in general and just seeing what it looks like. But to see, well, I'm doing this, here's a news story or something that's happening that you need to report as accurately as possible versus, oh, here's a nice photo. And by the way, I didn't tell you I just replaced the entire sky because I didn't like the way the sky looked when I was out, but I made the sky look a whole lot nicer, which of course, as Riley, you were talking a little bit about with Mark and everything, it's like, you just can't do that.
Right. Well,
That's not right.
It depends what the usage. So
True.
Now, if you're doing it for commercial photography, advertorial photography, or a client, you're probably going to be fine, depending on where you got that sky. If it was either your sky or stock size, or some other thing that you had rights to. If you just stole someone else's sky photo, that you'd come into a slew of problems there legally. However, with photojournalism and editorial photography specifically, there are very clear rules and ethics of what is allowed and what is deemed editorial. And it's something that every photojournalist learns, obviously, but it basically boils down to an image that is taken cannot be manipulated or, as you said, compositional, computational. It can't be anything other than what was taken, with some exceptions of some minor tweaks in, say, lighting and shadows, color, just to boost things. But you can't put a bird in or a sky in and say, yeah, here's a picture of, people at the voting booths at the election. That's not going to really work.
Yeah.
So I actually have a section in the book that goes into the rules and ethics and explains why they are rules and what they actually mean. There's other ones like you're not allowed to accept bribes or, pay your sources. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And it sounds obvious when you hear it, but it might not be something that you would otherwise know or think of.
Right. And the one thing I can think of where more and more people are becoming maybe accidental photojournalist when, like you said, since what is it? I believe once it was like 98% of the population has a smartphone on them, iPhone or Android. So you can just be out walking around, something happens.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, I saw an accident happen or flooding's happening or something, and you want to take a couple pictures and then you start posting, and you see a couple times where people say, if it's a good photo, you may post it to Instagram, and it's like, oh, hi, I'm from so-and-so and so-and-so. Can I use your photo, when we run a story on this thing, or if we attribute it?
Right.
And if you're someone who's somewhat serious about photography in general, you're more likely to take photos than someone who maybe isn't. It's good to have this kind of in the back of your head saying, hey, I tend, like, when things happen or, events happen, I like to take photos to share with people, but, having the knowledge in the background, even if it's not, always I'm thinking straight ahead about it, but it's like, oh, wait a minute, I read that in the book about a situation like this and how to handle it, or how to, even the basics of framing the photos. Because one thing I noticed on your website, and let me actually get your website here. I want to make sure it's right. RileyArthur.com. Mm-hmm. Your photos, even the ones that are, the straight story photos, there's still a very artistic framing of it, including the use of colors and everything else. So even if you think of a straight, something that could be used as a straight news photo, mm-hmm. there's more than just, getting the subject correct, if you will. But there's an artistic part to it, which unfortunately, and this is kind of going off what Greg said, if they're sending someone out who maybe is more of a reporter and saying, by the way, here's a smartphone, go for it, which we all know, unfortunately, people, companies tend not to train people as well as they should when they're giving them new duties.
Right.
They have what they're reporting on, and maybe what they're supposed to be writing, and the photography maybe isn't as in front of their mind.
Exactly.
So even you may have the technology. I'm sorry, go ahead. And like I said, you may not have the skill or the training to pull out, what a photo really can give you?
Well, there is an art to it, as you said, and there is some skills that you can learn, like knowing which direction the light is and how that will affect your photo. If your subject is behind the light or to the side of the light, or how to use natural light to your advantage. Those are all very teachable skills, but if you don't know them and you're just snapping away on the fly, you're just not going to get the best content. Now, the interesting thing today is, because, especially in a sort of COVID environment, there is something called UGC, which is user-generated content. And you'll see this in a lot of online media especially, but even in newspapers, that they'll have pictures taken by the source of the story or something. You know, this couple bought this house for $40,000 and changed it into this $1 million mansion, or what have you. Okay, that's an example. And it'll be a picture that clearly was taken by their mom or something like that. And even when I'm working with the editorial teams for the tech company that I work for, they will source those UGC images, and then they have to tell those sources how to take good photos. And so it's almost a bit like a telephone situation where I'm giving them the guidelines, they're giving the source the guidelines, and then that photographer is being told how to shoot them. And the photos that you sometimes get, and it's not just me or the people that I work with who are great, it's other websites that you'll notice online. It's the same thing. It's the same sort of photos. Or it's what's really interesting is you'll get people sending in photos that they think they look good in. So they'll send their wedding photo or their engagement photo, and it has nothing whatsoever to do about their lost dog or whatever the story is about. And it's just really fascinating that everyone has a camera on them at all times, with the smartphone, with iPhones or Androids or Samsung, a number of different makes and models these days. But not everyone necessarily knows how to take a good portrait, a good landscape, a good editorial photo. And so this book is really aiming to teach those really basic and advanced skills. So I'm hoping that really does help bridge the gap.
Well, there's 22 chapters, and I cannot get over how much different types of content you cover. This is like I said, this is a full blown photography course mixed in with photojournalism. Like, how these different things can be used in photojournalism, like lighting, weather, reflections, color, black and white, macro, all just to name a few. I don't know which chapter is going to be my favorite. I'm not real. I'm a landscape guy, and I do dabble a fair bit in macro, but I haven't really been one to do like street photography or like people taking pictures of people. I mean, I took a ton of pictures at my son's wedding a couple of years ago, but that's kind of a different thing. But so I'm really looking forward to there's a chapter on photographing people, and I'm really looking forward to diving into some of this stuff to see if I can't step out of the box a little bit and kind of broaden my horizons on the content that I do create. I mean, like I say, if you look at my Instagram, it's all landscape stuff. Pretty much all of it is landscape or flowers or macro. So this could very well help me, open up my creativity a little bit. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you. Yeah, if you sink your teeth into the book and you get closer to the end, you'll find my two favorite chapters. One is on the travel log and everything that goes into shooting a travel story. And it isn't just sunsets and beaches, what you think, oh, of course, there just happen to be a beautiful place and they're going to take good photos. Not necessarily. I've seen terrible photos of Paris. I've taken terrible photos in Paris, for example. And my other favorite chapter is a sense of humor, is finding those little comical moments in the everyday that you see. And those that hit the newsstands are, can be really fun. So it's just how to find humor in the mundane and really kind of capture those moments. So those two chapters always bring a smile to my face even after I've written them.
Yeah. So I have a question.
Okay.
What is your approach to, like with photojournalism, street photography must be a big part of that, at least in my mind anyway. What is your approach to doing that type of photography? Like when it comes to taking pictures of people, like obviously with the big DSLR, they know you're taking a picture of them when you have it pointed in their direction. But with a smartphone, it's so much easier to, I call it shoot from the hip.
Right.
And then they wouldn't even know what you're doing. Like you could be crouched down at a storefront, getting ready to take a picture. Somebody's walking through and you can actually make it look like you're going to wait till they're done, but then snap away as they're going through and they're not going to be any the wiser.
Absolutely. And you can also have someone fake posing and you're shooting something else and they think you're taking photos of the person that's fake posing. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do it. You can also set up a phone on a street corner and they'd never see it walking by because it's so small. There's so much that you can do to conceal the camera, to go unnoticed, to really get that genuine candid that you saw in the early 20th century, late 19th century, and even up into the 60s, depending on where you're shooting. Now, everyone is weary of the cameras, in part because DSLRs are large, and between the lens and the face and the camera body, you've got a good 1.5 feet. You're very separated from the subject, and cognitively, it creates a barrier. So the person who's not expecting or wanting their photo taken, you've got this perimeter between this big lens and your face. And so you're not even making eye contact with people often. So, it can be daunting to shoot or to be shot in that scenario. Now, with an iPhone, a lot of people who wouldn't be comfortable, even if they were aware that you were taking their photo, kind of don't care when you're taking it with an iPhone or with a smartphone because, one, everyone has their iPhone, and two, it's just less intrusive in that way. However, to your comment that no one knows you're taking a phone, absolutely that's true. That being said, as someone that also shoots from the hip, I tend to be aware when people are also shooting from the hip. So when I notice that, I definitely, depending on if I'm in the mood or not, I'll shift my body or I'll put a hand over my face or make a silly face or something like that. And you can usually tell right away if they're onto you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. Now, I live in what I call a small town. It's considered a city. It's about 22,000 people. And it's not like downtown Toronto where you can go down there and you can snap away out on the street like nobody's business and really nobody really cares. But in this town, I think people get a little a little upset that you're snapping their picture. Do you approach people and say, hey, can I take your picture? Or are you basically just trying to shoot from the hip all the time?
It depends what I'm shooting and what the purpose is. If I'm shooting for a publication, often it is advantageous to get their name and their permission for legal and editorial content reasons. It's just more interesting when you know who the subject is and what they're there for. If I am trying to shoot a community that might not be as welcoming to photos, for instance, you say you're near a small town. Where I'm staying right now in Michigan, I'm about 30 minutes from an Amish community and a Mennonite community. And then the Mennonites are a little bit more welcoming to it, but the Amish do not want their photos taken. They do not, practice technology. They have cars, but they don't have electricity. So they are a very cloistered community. And so if you're going to be shooting them, you have to be a little bit more obtuse or careful because you're doing it as street photography or documentary photography or photojournalism. But chances are, if you ask their permission, they will say no.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because we have Mennonites in this area too.
Okay.
They come into town generally with horse and buggy in the summer. Oftentimes in the winter, they'll all board a school bus and come in because they're roughly in the same area, probably about 20 or 25 minutes out of town here. So they'll come in and they'll do their shopping and groceries and stuff like that. They'll pick a day of the week and they'll come in. But I've never really tried to capture them with my phone. So maybe when I read up on photographing people, chapter 12, I'll get some pointers and figure out how to do that. Because like I say, I want to kind of broaden my horizons a little bit and, shoot some people with my camera, not a gun.
I'll tell you what, they are not opposed to you photographing their horses or their buggies. They take great pride in having well-groomed horses and having beautiful buggies. So if you want to have, I have this great photograph. It didn't make it into the book because it wasn't shot on an iPhone, but I have this great photograph of a horse and buggy tied up at a Marathon gas station.
Oh, really?
And it's I crouch real low, so I'm basically kneeling or squatting, shooting up at this horse with this big Marathon gas station logo, and it just looks very odd that there's a horse and buggy at the gas station.
Yeah. Hey, do they sell hay there?
Maybe he went in to get tobacco or something. I'm not sure, but there's opportunities that you can take within that community that might be a little bit more respectful or put you more at ease.
Yeah. So Dave, I sent you the copy there. Did you get to look at the table of contents? Anything there that you're kind of curious about?
Well, actually, it's something what you kind of springboarding off what you were talking about photographing people. And well, first of all, hopefully soon-ish, we'll be able to get into large enough groups we can worry about photographing people. Always a positive. But I know one thing that we kind of missed in Pittsburgh last year. And, I know when people hear Pittsburgh, they still think steel mills. Kind of like you think, Detroit, you think car factories. But one of the big conventions that Pittsburgh has, and it's normally around the 4th of July, so it's maybe not on, most of the time it's around, but it's a few days, one or the other, is the furry convention.
Oh, wow. That would be a great opportunity.
So we get ArthurCon is I think it's the largest furry convention in the U.S. And, they love coming to Pittsburgh. We love having them here. They're always fun. It's fun. They have a parade, which I can only imagine being in some of them with their full furry costumes in July, having a parade. That can't be the most comfortable in the world. But they're always welcoming for photos.
Right. So you get the Comic-Con people, you get furries, you get people, Carnival, who are dressing up, who perhaps made their costumes from scratch or put a lot of pride into composing their costume and their look and their character. And those people are comfortable because they are in character. And so they feel less threatened because they're performing. It's a performative thing. And they're part of a group. They're not independently walking around, hopefully, in a bunny costume. Maybe they are. I don't know.
We actually have one person who actually does that, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah, not local to like my neighborhood, but around Pittsburgh. He lives as a furry, which is fine. In my mind, if you're not hurting anyone, live your life. Live your life to be happy.
It's probably a pretty warm outfit for this time of year, so that's probably pretty smart.
That's a positive there, yeah.
And he's always wearing a mask, so he can go into grocery stores and he doesn't have to worry about putting on a mask.
Yeah. That's always a good thing.
Or she. Yes. Maybe it's a she. I don't know.
No, yeah. But the other thing is that I always tell people I have like two hobbies. One is iPhone photography. The other is running.
I thought you were going to say you're a furry.
No. I not quite that. My group of people tend to be mostly in shorts and short sleeve shirts and tend to do a lot more physical exertion. But one thing I do like to do is either before races, especially larger ones, is just take crowd pictures.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but after the Boston bombing, they're a lot more locked down on just having people near
the finish
either
line.
the start or even the start line. They card, at least when I do my long races or half marathons.
Okay.
So when I do like the Pittsburgh half marathon, there's around 20,000 people at the start line. But in terms of crowds or anyone else, they're on other side of fences and barriers. So it's really hard for someone out there to get a feeling for what it's like to be inside the
experience.
The pen. Yeah, exactly. So I try to get photos where at least friends and family and, co-workers is like, even if you're not, let's say like I would know if you're someone who's like, I don't see myself running down like a couple blocks, let alone 13 miles. Right. But there's something about being in that crowd, in that swarm, that you kind of just want to share with people. So
David, do you wear a camera, or do you do drone photography? What is your approach when you shoot? Do you bring just your phone? Sorry, I have a co-pilot here who muted me. No worries. Okay, there we go. No, I use my I run with my phone for both tracking and for listening to things while I'm running. And lots of times I'm able to, depending on how crowded it is, I can sometimes just take my phone right out of my pocket and just do a quick shot of the crowd. Even it's easier before the race to get, a crowd shot, because you can obviously stop and take photos and be a little more steady. But with the live photo aspect of the iPhone, I've taken photos during a run where I can just kind of slip the phone out of my pocket where I'm carrying it and just take a couple quick shots while I'm running and then put it back in my pocket. What angle do you shoot, from the hip, or do you crouch down? What do you try to, what level do you try to shoot at? Normally it's eye level, to be honest. Well, okay. Especially before the race, because I don't know what it's going to be like when they start having live races again. Yeah. But before COVID, we were almost every race that I was in, either 10K, 5K, even the 10 mile or the halves, they tend to crowd you really tight together. Think like Black Friday, getting ready to get into the store. So you're shoulder to shoulder with people. So if I'm trying to crouch down, it's kind of hard to get the right angle. Now, if I could plan ahead a little bit, and some places you can get kind of off on the side and crouch down, I could try that, in terms of shooting that. But mostly it's eye level, or me trying to reach above my head to get like a general crowd shot per se. Yeah, I have a whole chapter on shooting crowds, so that might be able to help you. Oh, that would definitely help, yeah. The other thing that could be interesting is if you, as an experiment, signed up, maybe didn't have your family on the receiving end at the end of the finish line, if crowds are even able to develop, as you said, would be to run a race as a photographer and be able to have the leisure to stop periodically and not have to keep your time and be less concerned about that. Because you could get some interesting photos. So a few years ago at this point, my husband worked the New York Marathon. Oh, that would be... I believe it's in, I think, November, or it's late in the year. And this year it was record heat. And that is a very long run. It goes over all 5 boroughs. And the carnage that he saw, he was working some of the medical booths, and just people were collapsing left and right. So I'm not saying I'm pro carnage, but it would be interesting to shoot from that kind of angle of seeing all the litter and all the race paraphernalia that just I've never seen marathon photos that look like that. Another thing, and this would be maybe not best for a male to shoot if you could even get access, would be the year that he did it. I don't know how he was in charge of this, but apparently there is a number of women who are new mothers and pump before the race and at the end of the race. And so he was in charge of labeling the breast milk pouches and transporting them to the finish line. And then at the end of the race, the year before he had done it, they had 2, new mothers. And the year he did it, they had over a dozen. And so women were just stripping and just pumping left and right. And he was like, I don't know what to do here. I'm just going to not look at anything and just take. Anyways, what I'm saying, if you're a female photographer, there might be a tasteful way to shoot that experience. That is something people don't know happens. And so I would just say to you, as maybe a challenge, think of other ways that you could shoot your races. That would, if you want to keep your time, maybe it would be less time intensive. But, is there a story that you haven't seen or you haven't told before? And it might be interesting to more than just you as well. It might be something you could sell to a publication. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Was it 2 years ago? I was recovering from, just getting old and the knees just not being what they used to be. So it was more of, I signed up for the race and it was like, I'm going to run the race. I don't care about my time. And if I have to stop and walk, I'll take some pictures along the way. Okay. Like you said, there are, especially, I do 1 or 2 trail races, but the road races does give you a real interesting viewpoint where you just really can't get that. A lot of times, a lot of places, there's no sidewalks per se to stop and take a photo, or it's not exactly convenient to stop and take a photo. Right. So that is something I'm starting to kind of keep an eye out more, as I'm not competitive running. I do it for fun and for exercise. I see. So the races are there partially just to, as saying, well, I need a goal.
Another medal.
Well, that too, yeah. Yeah. The shiny medals are nice. The shiny medals are nice. Yes, they are.
Riley, he has tons of them.
That's all right. Everyone's got their thing.
Yeah. And no, it's a good thing. It's definitely a good thing.
My book actually has a section on finding the story. There might be a niche hobby that you have that is something that you could sell. I have a friend who is actually now living in Canada, and he and his friends are sort of competitive, not professionally, but they do kind of crazy mountain biking. And he put together a little trip where they scaled this mountain range, and he sold it to the New York Times and had this whole photo essay in the New York Times just because he has some outdoorsy friends that were game. Wow. So you might be part of some niche community or have an extreme hobby or something like that. So it's always worth thinking about your network, building your network, but also thinking about, is there something within my community that people would be interested in? And is there a way that I could photograph that on my iPhone? Yeah. And like I said, it's just also one of those things where the iPhone, I'm sorry, Greg, but it's so conveniently with you at all times where, like you said, and generally I know, like when I'm involved with things with a large group, me taking a photo doesn't stand out. Like you were saying about, trying to get more of a candid shot of people who aren't posing. Right. That it's easier to get people, I hate to say acting naturally, but instead of trying to, even something like a GoPro or, something that stands out where generally everyone has a phone with them. Right. I mean, it sounds like you should really make friends with the one furrier in your neighborhood. That sounds like a great photo essay. I bet that guy would not be photo shy if you just followed him around for a week.
Yeah, a day in the life of the big furry rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was looking at the excuse me, the table of contents, and telling the story. Chapter 13 is that, we just talked about it obviously, but that's something else that is of interest to me. I put together like there's an app called Stellar, and I usually put together a little photo slideshow, and you can include videos in them of different things on there. Usually it's kind of themed around a location or something like that. But that's a good way to tell a story with photos. So I'm really interested to seeing what that chapter is all about, because I do like putting videos together, like video slideshows, and generally they're about locations, like I say, and the Apple in the Apple Photos app, the memories that come up, they're often centered around locations that I've been to, and I again, part of broadening my horizon on what I do with this stuff, I'd like to be able to tell stories about things other than just a location. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And one way you could do it, you say they're all location based. So maybe you go on a road trip, or maybe go somewhere new, is put together a shot list, or do something like a traditional walkabout where you just spend a day and you try to put together a story with where you are. And maybe you challenge yourself not to take standard landscapes, and maybe you take landscapes vertically. It could be as simple as that. But just making a slight change to your normal routine, I think, will also sharpen your eye as a photographer in knowing how to use the skills that you already have in composition and focus and all the other basic skills, but also applying them to something slightly out of your comfort zone will also inform your work as a landscape and macro photographer, because you are, pushing yourself beyond your regular skill set.
Yeah. So, okay. So is there any apps or anything that you use in particular to help tell your stories? Like I say, there's Stellar, which is an app for, you make these slides and basically you can add text to them and tell a story that way. What's your approach, if you don't mind me asking, like to telling a story?
In terms of sort of new apps for telling stories, Adobe Spark, and there's a number of Canva and things like that you can put together. There's a handful of video apps as well. I don't shoot a lot of video, to be quite honest with you. I'm more of a stills photographer. So I'm more of a traditionalist when it comes to shooting stories. I don't like to put a lot of text on it, but when I share it. There are a few apps that I like for editing photos, not so much for sort of creating a sort of social story.
Right.
How about you? What are your favorites?
Well, like I say, I use Stellar. Other than that, the Apple Memories part of the Photos app, I make use of that a lot. But other than that, I'll put something together in iMovie and make a video of it. The last 2 years in a row, I've done my favorites of the year before. So I have I think it's like 26-minute video I put together of my favorite photos from last year, which was, being 2020. You'd wonder, how the heck could you have so many pictures, from a year that was one that everybody wants to forget. But I managed to do it. And, a lot of them are just around here. I'm not a real traveler. I don't go anywhere. Not that I could anyway last year, or now even, but I'm just a local guy who likes to show the world what's in my own backyard. But yeah, it's more or less, it's mostly iMovie. I played around with LumaFusion a little bit. I have some video editing things like that on my computer, like what's on DaVinci Resolve, sorry. Pretty heavy duty program that I really don't know much about, but it was free, so I put it in. But yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I have to worry about really is the shooting part, getting out and kind of putting a story together. And I'm the worst one for not pre-planning like, writing a storyboard or something like that. So, that's something else I need to work on. But one of the biggest stories.
You can use notes in your phone and just make bullet points. Just say,
Yeah.
today I want to get a shot of these 3 things, and not make it super ambitious. That's a really good way to start a shot list if you've never created one before. And then when it's less daunting, you're going to be less liable to ignore it or forget about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So one thing, like one of the biggest stories that I know of that you're telling is the diners of New York City on Instagram.
Yeah, that's been my longest ongoing project to date.
Yeah. How long have you been doing that?
February 14th was 5 years.
Wow. Yeah. Really?
Yeah. I actually did a story about the 5-year anniversary, and I went over, how many diners I photographed, how many have closed since then, how many are in each borough, and so on. And it's hard for me to even believe, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I'll link to that account in the show notes too, so people can have a look at it. There are some really cool looking diners in New York City. We have like coffee shops here, but nothing really.
Well, you're Canada. Diners is a quintessential American tradition. Why would you have them?
Yeah,
you have
really.
poutine though, so you got that on us. But
we have what?
Poutine.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is so not good for you though.
No, well, most diner food isn't either.
Yeah. I mean, there's diners in Toronto, of course. Like Toronto has probably anything that any major city in the U.S. would have to offer, I would think. It has different sections of town, like Chinatown and things like that. But no, your Instagram account for the diners of New York City is just amazing. And I didn't realize it was that long that you were doing it. So that's amazing.
Thank you. And, I've been utilizing my iPhone more in more recent years for the project. I still largely shoot on my DSLR. I do sometimes shoot video or GIFs, moving video that I turn into GIFs, live footage, into the account, but primarily I'm shooting with my DSLR. But I am recording sound, and I'm recording interviews, and I'm making notes, and I'm certainly using Google Maps for the whole process. So the phone is really probably more useful than my camera because it does a whole lot more when I'm doing this project. And the transcription apps are really great for when I do get interviews. So I go through all that in the book too, how to record sound properly, how to do this. So I'm even utilizing some of these things for projects that have been ongoing before I was even shooting with the iPhone for the project.
Yeah, that's. What made you decide to do this in the first place?
One? The book,
the Diners of New York City. The diners, but we're supposed to talk about the book. I was going to ask you ask that about the book too, but we'll go with the diners first.
Sorry, I'll answer your first one first. So the Diners project was really, I essentially was living in New York at a time where I noticed that diners were closing very rapidly. And I lived next to a very historic, really funky looking diner. And I thought when I moved there, I've got to photograph this. And it wasn't until I realized that diners were closing so quickly that I thought, is anyone photographing this? Who else is photographing this? And really. It turned out at the time I was the only one, so I just took the whole thing on.
There you go.
and so it's been a few years in the making, but I'm trying to photograph every single diner in New York City. I have done that, but now 2 have opened that weren't there the last time I was there, so now I have 2 more to go. But even after I photograph them all, there's still ones I want to go back because, as you know, as a photographer, there are certain angles you want to get. You want to go when there's less people. You want to go when there's more people. You want to go back for the best light for neon. When you have a project that you are so in love with, the opportunities are endless for ways to shoot and reshoot a subject. And so just finding that project that can carry you through years is really rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. So what gave you the idea to do the book?
Well, great segue. because actually I am interested in doing a photo book for the Diners of New York project.
Oh.
And I have for people who don't know what goes into publishing the traditional route, if you're not going to self-publish, you have to, unless you happen to be the friend of the publisher or know somebody, you have to put together a book proposal and really outline what a book's going to look like. And so I put together a book proposal for the Diners of New York project, and then you have to look at some publishers and find the right ones. And I found this publisher, Amherst Media Publishing. They do great industry photography books. So I sent it to them, and they liked the project. But it just so happens they no longer do photo books. They primarily publish guidebooks, photo how-to books. And so I got to talking to them, and they basically said, we like you, but this is the kind of book we do, not what you're looking to do. Would you be interested in doing that instead? And so, we had a few conversations, and we talked about what we could do. And this is what I thought I could offer, would be a book on this topic. And so it was kind of a strange turn of events where there was a bit happy accident would be a great way to describe it, but it worked out, and I was able to put this book together. And I still want to do a Diners book. I'm still chopping that around to publishers, but it's quite a process. So it's one of those sort of serendipitous things where, if anything, this is my first foray into traditional mass market publishing, and it's a really good training ground for me. So hopefully it's the first of many books to come.
Yeah, and you must have been awful nervous.
Sure. I didn't tell too many people until after it was already published. Not even after I submitted it. I was very superstitious that I didn't want to jinx myself. I didn't want to sort of overpromise and underdeliver and talk a big game. That's not really my style. So all of a sudden, I sort of announced on my social media, and all these people are coming out of the woodwork like, "You wrote a book during the pandemic?" Like, oh yeah, this is what I've been working on endlessly during this whole time. So it was a great time to do it, but also really kind of comical that I didn't share it, throughout the process. But I didn't want to lose focus of the end goal, and I certainly didn't want to psych myself out for all these other people that were rooting for me along and asking for updates. That would have been too much for me to handle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And as if you needed any added pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, I was writing this. I have a day job. I work for a tech company as a photo manager. So I was writing this in the mornings before work and weekends and nights. And so it was in these little pockets of time that I could kind of cobble together a coherent book. And maybe if I had less stagnated time, if I had sort of full days to work on it on days on end, I wouldn't have so many chapters. Maybe they might have been longer or what have you. It's just how it ended up turning out. But it was certainly a rewarding process. Yeah.
Well, just giving it a quick scan, like I say, I want to get the hard copy and read it. But looking at a quick scan of the preview you sent us, it looks really good. I think the chapters are long enough to be interesting and short enough to keep us interested and go from one to the next. I can't tell you the last time I read a book cover to cover, but I can tell you when I'll be doing the next one.
Oh, I sure hope so.
Yeah. So, well, Riley, this has been just an absolute treat to speak to you about your book and all the other stuff that we touched on. Tell everybody where they can find you online.
Excellent. So I am available on my website, rileyarthur.com. I'm also available on Instagram at rileyart and at Diners of NYC, as we mentioned before.
Alrighty. We'll have links in the show notes for those. Dave, where can they find you?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter as ProfPod. The Instagram more for photography, Twitter also for photography, but a little bit of yelling thrown in there also.
Alrighty. And you can find me on Instagram at Macmillan Photo and on Twitter, Macmillan_photo, and links to everywhere else at about.me/Macmillan. We do this show every 2 weeks, as long as life doesn't get in the way. And you can find the podcast at iphonography.ca and on the Apple Podcast app, iHeartRadio, and just about anywhere else that you might be able to get a podcast. Just do a search for iPhonography and you'll probably find it. As you know, this show stemmed from the Artful Eye photography community, and it is hosted at artfulipc.club. That'll take you to the MeWe page, and we're still getting new members all the time, and it's a growing community, and it's a lot of fun. So give it a look. And Riley, good luck with the book when it launches. What was the date again? March 16th?
Yep, it comes out March 16th, but it's available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and at your local bookstore as well. Okay,
cool. So I'll have the Amazon link on the show notes for this episode. And
Greg, I just want to mention real quick. Let's say for one of our listeners, if you read the book and it's something that you find that you're interested in, and definitely want to help Riley out, doing a pre-order definitely helps a lot. The pre-ordering process versus waiting for it to get published, that's definitely the major help.
Yes, I've pre-ordered it, and now it ships on the 16th, Riley?
No, actually, I've been getting texts all day that those who pre-order it should get it before March 16th. Even up in Canada, you should get it very soon.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully I'll get it this weekend and give me something to do. And if it's snowing and doing whatever, then I won't care. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Riley. Great conversation, and all the best with the book. And hopefully we'll be in touch again sometime.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Riley.
All righty. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.